True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I'm so excited to be here with you because it seems like it has been forever. I know I did a joint live with Forensic Intent with my friend Brian Inton, which was great to talk about another important case, of course, Ellen Greenberg. I'm glad we got to break that down with the latest and greatest information that Brian had. For those who have never tuned into this channel, I like to call it kind of a no drama channel. We're not a lot about getting into the soap opera version of cases. We are about getting into the facts about cases. And the case we're going to talk about today is Harmony Montgomery. Now, for those who have followed Harmony Montgomery, this may be one of the most tragic cases ever that I've certainly seen in my career, not only from sustained domestic violence, child abuse against a little one that actually had a vision issue in one eye, a little one that was, oh my gosh, if you have seen the pictures, beautiful child, just absolutely beautiful. I think that people that saw photos of Harmony just wanted to take her home and spoil her and get her off to school and care for her. And unfortunately, that is not what happened. In fact, Harmony Montgomery was murdered ultimately by her father, Adam Montgomery, who apparently just beat her to death. Just one too many punches this time. She had sustained many violent injuries in the past. She was subjected to doing things like taking her toothbrush and cleaning the toilet and then using it, being put in the corner to until she would urinate on herself and then, of course, be beaten. Just the unthinkable. Anyway, a deal was struck, and her stepmother came forward. People were very upset about the plea agreement that was offered, but honestly, I don't know if they would have got a conviction of Adam Montgomery without the cooperation. Again, they used her government subsidies for years while she was actually dead, and feigned, I guess, her being alive when she was really deceased. But fortunately, justice did catch up. But I don't want to spend much longer because I want to welcome our amazing guest. We have retired Judge Carol Erskine with us. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit about Carol, and I wrote some notes down because it's another one of these situations where her resume is just so awesome. She's been an attorney. She has been a child advocate forever. She's an adoptive mother. So she actually adopted a child herself, and I want her to tell us that story. She's been a juvenile court judge for 20 years and just retired in 2023. And so we've seen her pop up on the Twitter format. I just love having her in our community because she brings a different perspective. Her and I don't always even agree on everything, but I tell you what, we both fight to bring forward law and facts and justice from our different vantage points. I have really enjoyed getting to know her in that space. A college professor, again, an attorney in the criminal justice system regarding children. I can't say enough about her, and she's an author too. Not only children's books, but most recently a book about Harmony Montgomery. And without further ado, I want to bring Judge Carol Erskine up on our stage. Carol, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I love being in the Twitter community with you, whether we agree or not agree. It's always a very civil, polite conversation about the law. So and I just have a great respect, for your background too, because it's not my background. It's a law enforcement background. It's different than a judicial background, but I think both equally important parts of the judicial system.
Oh, absolutely. And Judge, I want to call you Judge. So at least for this, for our viewers that are kind of tuning in, Carol said, listen, you don't need to call me Judge. And I just have always had, for any of you in the justice system, as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, as law enforcement, we just hold our judges to such, at least I do, such an important stature in the judicial community, because quite frankly, the buck stops with the judge's rulings. So time after time, going to the residence of judges in the middle of the night, uh, even sitting, believe it or not, just once you get familiar with the judges you work with, I remember sitting on the edge of the judge's bed, because he was actually totally under the weather. He was in bed and going over a probable cause affidavit. And I sat close because I don't know whether he couldn't hear as well, but I remember sitting on the edge of his bed, and his wife was like, had chicken soup there for him. In any event, I've just had the highest regard for all the judges in the federal system and in the state system that I've worked with. And so, Judge, for this, I'm going to have to call you Judge because I have that much respect.
Well, I do appreciate that. And I can relate to just having police officers coming to the house, with, for a search warrant at times, especially when my kids were little, and reminding them to go in the other room and play with their Nerf guns, not in front of the police officers. So I hear what you're saying, but thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get down to really talking about Harmony. You heard kind of my very thumbnail version of the facts regarding Harmony Montgomery. And I just wondered if you wouldn't mind adding to that any other details you wanted to add about her story in life and in her death.
Sure, thanks. Well, Harmony was placed in foster care in Massachusetts when she was 2 months old. Her dad, Adam Montgomery, was in jail at the time after a drug deal gone bad where he shot someone in the head during that drug deal. That person survived, and he entered into a plea agreement and was serving time in prison. And the mom, Crystal, was struggling, young mom, struggling with substances, and Harmony was removed. And they worked with the mom, and then Harmony was returned to the mom for a period of time. She relapsed, and they removed Harmony again. That happened 3 times. Harmony was removed from her mom, so she was in and out of foster care. The case remained open with the court for 4 years and 8 months. And I think for the most of the time she was in foster care. She was never returned to the father. He only had visits. He only saw her 20 times in almost 5 years. And that was with a supervisor standing right over him. And the mom, I think, she tried very hard. And Harmony was just in foster care for most of her life, other than I think about 15 months back and forth when she was with the mom. She was in foster care, and the placement of her back and forth in foster care really caused behavioral and emotional problems for her. She was in a wonderful foster home, the same foster home 3 times, but in the end, they just were not getting the assistance they needed from DCF to manage her struggles. I mean, she had medical issues. She was blind in one eye, but it was the result of a condition called septo-optic dysplasia, which involved neurological problems, which made it difficult for her sometimes to navigate around furniture and things of that nature. And it caused other problems as well. So she had medical issues, physical issues. These were disabilities that weren't addressed by the department or under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in fact, these loving foster parents had to have DCF place her in another foster home because DCF just wasn't providing even therapy for her. She was, like most children in Massachusetts, on a wait list. So it was, a case handled very poorly by the Department of Children and Families. And then, of course, after that, it comes to exactly how did Harmony end up in Montgomery's custody.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions about some of the points you just made. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about her mom, Crystal's story. What kind of abuse was Harmony suffering in her care? Was this neglect because of her drug addiction? Was she exposed to needles and drugs? Can you get into a little bit why she was taken away from Crystal's story?
Yeah, it's not really clear because the Office of the Child Advocate, which wrote the investigation report about Harmony's case, didn't really go into it in detail. But Crystal herself has done a number of interviews. She did an interview with Brian Enton very early on. It was an in the street interview where she said, "Look, I, I'm responsible for the fact that, that I'm an addict. I'm a recovering addict." She didn't shy away from it. And, like hundreds, if not thousands of cases that I had over 20 years on child abuse and neglect cases, it's really difficult with substance use issues because it usually results in neglect kinds of issues, not necessarily abuse, but neglect kind of issues, and just an inability to manage the basic and daily needs of a child. And Harmony was an infant when she came into custody. But Crystal herself, had struggles. She grew up in a very difficult situation. She herself was in DCF for a while. I mean, I'm sure there was trauma there, and not a lot of it was addressed. She has been very clear that she herself had a lot of struggles. So it's not unusual, for people that struggle in childhood to have substance use issues. I have a lot of sympathy for her because even though the reunification didn't work, she clearly had a bond with that child. And I think the records are clear about that.
I'm glad you got into the nuts and bolts on that, because I know a lot of people in the community, have a lot of issue with her, even though I agree with you from the very beginning. She owned her mistakes, she owned her issues, and it was clear, I think, that she was really struggling to get help and to help Harmony as best she could. I want to talk now about the Department of Children and Youth Services. I believe that's what it's called there. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Every jurisdiction it's called something else. DCY.
Yeah, DCF. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that department, particularly, you talked about Harmony not getting some of the medical attention and other attention she needs. Is this normal within this department?
Well, I think in this case, as the OCA reveals, that they just didn't provide Harmony with the necessary level of services that she needed. She was getting medical care while she was with the department. That was a good thing. She had doctors at, great medical doctors. She had ophthalmologists. She had very early struggles. They initially diagnosed her with something else, and the prognosis was poor, but she overcame a lot. The problem is DCF, as the Office of the Child Advocate says, and as I write a lot about in the book, just did not do a lot to manage her case. It was like, okay, let's, she's not doing well at home. There's a relapse. Let's, put her in, let's put her in foster care, and then let's take her out again, and then let's put her in again, and let's take her out again and put her in again. There were many, many mistakes by the department. And one of the biggest mistakes by the department is they didn't really evaluate the father. He wasn't all that cooperative. He didn't do the action plan. He didn't do a psychological evaluation. And they never did a family assessment of him. And what is, I think, one of the most upsetting things that I write about is they didn't evaluate Kayla Montgomery, who was an active substance user. So they took Harmony away from her mom, who was working to get better and who I think was doing pretty well by the time the trial came up. And they end up, the department was opposed to it, but she ends up with the father and this, who was unevaluated by the department, violating their own regulations. And he's married to a woman who was using substances, who testified at the firearms trial that she never had any sobriety until she went to jail. So Harmony was placed in the home of this father who had this rage-filled criminal record, and a stepmother who was actively using substances. And so it was a recipe for disaster. And as I say, I call the first chapter in the book a lethal trajectory. And that's what she was on, a lethal trajectory. It shouldn't surprise anyone that it had the horrific outcome that it did.
Judge, I think the biggest head shaker for me, and as I listen to you, I can't stop shaking my head. And throughout the case, it's just one of these jaw-dropping cases. But how in the heck did Harmony ever get in custody of Adam Montgomery? How did it happen? Please educate us.
Yeah, that's the question, of course, and that's, a good portion of the book. And I think a lot of people will be very critical of the judge, and there were a number of problems. And one of the first problems is that Crystal was in Boston on Jameson's case and called her lawyer and said, I need a continuance. I don't want to go ahead with the trial. I have my own petition to get my child back. And so, which was a fair request. But the Office of the Child Advocate makes clear that there was pressure put on her lawyer by the other lawyers, and the judge wanted the case to go ahead. And the lawyer then asks for continuance and then bows to that pressure, calls Crystal, this is what the investigators say, and goes back into the court and says, oh, she's in agreement, which she adamantly and believably denies because she had her own petition. And he or she, the lawyer, tells the judge she's in agreement. And then he or she, the lawyer, did not participate at all in the trial. He just, according to the OCA, sat there. But the big concern is, and this is over and over again, and I detail this in very extensively in the book, is that the OCA says Harmony's lawyer took the position that Harmony wanted to be with her father. That's what Harmony told the lawyer. And so the lawyer said, well, that's Harmony's position, and I'm going to represent that. And then the lawyer said, but supposedly there's two different explanations. So the lawyer then said, well, I'm going to use substituted judgment, and it's my judgment that even if Harmony's too young to make that decision, I'm going to step in and I'm going to evaluate the evidence, and then I'm going to make this substituted judgment, meaning that if Harmony were old enough to decide what she wanted, she would actually decide that she wanted to be with this man who had a long criminal record, who didn't comply with the department, who didn't do any of the services, who didn't visit her. There were times he didn't visit her for a full year during that period of time. And so it's absurd when you think about the fact that Massachusetts has this rule that children can have an express preference about who they want to be with. And I also found this confidential memo that they sent, that the Committee for Public Counsel Services, which is the agency that represents indigent parents and children, they said something completely different. They said if it was Harmony's goal to go with her father, then it was the lawyer's obligation to do that. I have to say, I don't buy that, but I criticize Massachusetts about being one of only a few states that has this position. So basically what you had was a DCF lawyer who had a case that wasn't handled by the social workers because they didn't have a lot of evidence, because they didn't do the mandated evaluations. And then you have the father's lawyer who puts him on the stand, and the child's lawyer who doesn't ask any questions, anything that was sufficient, just vague questions. The mother's lawyer who asked no questions. And as the OCA report says, all three lawyers, who all work for the same agency, by the way, all three lawyers took the position that Harmony should be with her, as they said, her fit father. So they had to make him look fit. And the way they did that is, as the OCA reports, they presented no evidence that he didn't comply with the department, that he didn't do a psych evaluation, that he didn't know of Harmony's needs, that he didn't understand her needs. They also didn't present evidence. He testified, oh, sure, I have a job and I have a home and everything's all good. But the lawyers didn't put any evidence in, like they didn't put a lease agreement in or rental agreement. They didn't put in any documentary evidence that he had a job. And they put no documentary evidence in, or evidence at all, that he had a teacher, a therapist, a doctor, an ophthalmologist. None of that went before the judge. And so the OCA makes very clear this was a one-day trial. It boiled down to his testimony and maybe the testimony of a social worker. And at the end of it, as they say, without any evidence that there were any concerns about him, because as they said, no one probed those concerns. The judge could only make a decision based on the evidence that was before him, and he walked out of there with custody. It's an absolute travesty. And within 5 months, he was beating her, as you said, having her scrub the toilets and sitting in a corner. Within 5 months, he was slamming her in the face, punching her in the eye, even though she was blind in one eye, and just abusing her until the day that she died, as he beat her over and over again at 3 different traffic lights, screaming at her for wetting her pants and pounding her in the head until she was moaning, and then stopped moaning, only for them to realize that she had died, and that he then took her body and put her into an Under Armour bag. That's, just how it all happened. It's such a tragic story, which is why I wanted to tell it with the 2 dads of Harmony's brother.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did. And I'm going to boil down a little bit of what you said. To be clear, Daddy gets on the stand, says whatever he wants without anyone fact checking him or providing any receipts. All the attorneys are at the same firm, which is a complete violation of a conflict of interest in my view. And then you have a judge that, quite frankly, judges are all powerful in their courtroom for the most part, and could have said, wait a minute, this isn't passing the smell test. Wait a minute, I don't have enough facts here. Wait a minute, no. You guys all need to come back, and I need to see XYZ to show that this person is fit. But basically, everybody dropped the ball, and Harmony was who suffered. Is that a good encapsulation?
Yes.
What you said so eloquently.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I think it's a good one. The agency, the public agency, Committee for Public Counsel Services, and their Child and Family Law Division, they have lawyers that are contracted from private practice, and then they have lawyers that are staff lawyers. But they train all the lawyers, they pay all the lawyers, they supervise all the lawyers. So yes, I make the case that it's a conflict of interest. And the Office of the Child Advocate and the Child Advocate herself said they need to look at this, to see, whether or not this style of legal representation or this model of legal representation is appropriate. And yes, a lot of people I'm sure people will comment saying, well, you're a judge and didn't criticize the judge. I mean, would I have done things differently? I don't know, but I will tell you this. So there was a case that came down a few years ago called Adoption of Norbert. And in that case, the judge did exactly what you said. Hey, I don't like this. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to keep asking questions until I can make a decision that's in the best interest of the child. And that case went up on appeal. And although they ultimately affirmed the decision, we were all told, you can't just step in and be a prosecutor in a case. You're a judge. You can ask questions to clarify evidence, but you cannot ask you can't ask substantive questions. Well, that doesn't fall on deaf ears, when the appeals court is criticizing a judge and that judge is having to deal with the fallout from it. So, it may have been, I might have said, I don't care. This case is 4 years old. There's thousands of pages. I want more information, but I would have to do that at my own risk, because they've made very clear we can't do that. So the judge could have asked questions to clarify, but what's to clarify in a 6-hour trial when they put the father on and he says, oh, I left my criminal past behind me, his 10, 12-year criminal past of shooting people in the head and, pushing someone out of a car and stabbing them and holding people at gunpoint. All these questions come up in the book. How did this happen? And so the point of the book is to piece it all together and say, this is how it happened. This is how she landed in New Hampshire. And of course, the big question in the case is why wasn't there a home study that happened in the other state, called an interstate compact for the placement of children? And I explained that in detail, but the argument was it's unconstitutional to make the father go through a home study because he's a parent and a custodian and it's not an adoptive placement. And New Hampshire actually had a ruling by their state Supreme Court that said, we're not going to do home studies on parents because they're parents, and they have this constitutional right. So Massachusetts, where Harmony was, says a completely different thing, where the Supreme Judicial Court says, no, you can do a home study on these. These are kids on abuse and neglect cases. And, if they're moving to another state, there should be a home study. But the confusion in the law, which is one of the things we're working with federal people to try to change, is what ended up with there being no home study. And child's lawyer agreed, apparently, that, didn't oppose there being no home study. So that meant Harmony went with no doctors, no therapists, no school, just what, as I'm sure just what abusers do. They isolate the people they abuse so that nobody can see them and nobody can step in. And that's exactly what he did. And Kayla didn't stop it.
And at the end of the day, too, wasn't this all about money? I mean, wasn't really Harmony just a meal ticket in terms of getting about $1,500 a month for them to use on drugs? I mean, at the end of the day, wasn't that why he wanted her?
Well, I think that's part of it for sure, because they immediately applied for those benefits. And during the trial, his drug dealer testified that when they didn't have money, he would take their food benefits. And at one point, there was testimony about the family having to eat baby food because they didn't have any food. So yes, they had those benefits, and those benefits supported their drug use, absolutely. But the bigger issue was he wanted Harmony because he wanted to take Harmony away from the mom and make sure that Crystal never had Harmony again. He hated Crystal. He despised her. And I thought one of the most interesting things that happened in the murder trial was his former best friend, this woman, Rebecca, I think her name was. She testified that he said, when he looked at her, she reminds me of her mother. And he said to her, I hate her to my very core. So this was all about what it had been about when they were together and what it was about with Kayla. And that is about Adam Montgomery's need to control. And whether that was pointing guns at people or shooting someone in the head, during a drug deal gone back, it was all about him needing to control. And he wanted control over Crystal. And that's how he got control. So I think it was a combination of both of those things.
And I want to add to that when we're talking about a guy like Adam Montgomery. These are sadists that, I mean, I use that word not clinically speaking. I am talking from a logical, what you see point of view in law enforcement. There are literally people that enjoy hurting other people. It's not something that's an issue for them. And it actually gives them pleasure. I think back a little bit to your control argument. But I think with people like Adam and many others, it's even beyond that because it gives them control and pleasure. It's their hate keeps them fueled, and their ability and desire to harm others and to see others in pain keeps them happy. I don't know how to say that any other way.
No, I think you're absolutely right. When Adam Montgomery's uncle showed up at the house in July, and she had this deep, deep black eye, and he said, "What happened? What happened?" And I think the uncle testified. He said this like a cocky son of a bee. That's what he testified to. He said, "I bashed her around the effing house." And just in a cocky way, which is really, I think, makes me think it's exactly what you are describing. Some people just like the idea of just being evil or hurting other people. And he seemed to, in my view, enjoy hurting other people, just these outrageous punishments. And, it's just a sad thing. And one of the things I say in the book is, with Kayla not interrupting these abusive episodes and allowing the stuff at home, I said, it just reminds me about the story in Cinderella, how the stepmother, just, I forget the exact quote, but that the stepmother, had this sort of side, a different side that she showed to everyone. And, I say it's like that story. I said, the only problem is, for Harmony, there was no fairy godmother. That only happens in fairy tales. And, that's what was going on. She was seeing it, and she was this stepmother that didn't interfere and didn't intervene right up until the day he was beating her to death. Only when it came time for Kayla Montgomery to save herself from a very long prison sentence did she decide that she was going to tell the story. And, it was too late for Harmony. I believe they removed her own children from her, and she doesn't have custody. But it's, I understand, I write about the abuse that she suffered too. He was, really abusing her and beating her, to make sure that she didn't tell the story. But, if she had just said one thing, even when DCF came to the house, she didn't step forward. I don't know how she can live with herself over that. I just don't.
In cases like hers, when we in law enforcement, when you have to make, and as a prosecutor, when you have to make a deal with the devil, you're making the deal with the devil. And you just have to, I think, internalize that someday she'll get hers. I've always said, and I'm not wishing anything bad upon her, because I hope she makes it through her sobriety. But just speaking from experience, people typically, and I'm not talking about all addicts, I'm talking about somebody like her, because this wasn't just about being an addict. This was about somebody committing fraud. This was somebody that was capable of watching a completely defenseless child get beaten and abused on a weekly basis. I don't know if we have it down that it was a week, but often. I consider abuse even keeping those kids in the back of the car. It was freezing cold, having them in a house without adequate heating, not properly educating your child. All of that I consider all abuse. And she was capable of that. So a lot of addicts are just struggling with staying sober, but she was capable of so much more. And I find that people like that, we'll see how long she maintains herself.
Yeah, I have my doubts, but I hope that she will. I think, the sad part about, one of the sad parts about this case is just the impact that it has on others. When you talk about law enforcement and having to make the deals, well, they understood that. Of course, I wrote this book, sort of at the urging of my friends Blair and Jonathan Miller, who are the dads of Jameson, Harmony's brother. I did his adoption. I finalized his adoption. The case wasn't in my court, but we had become friends by that time, talking a lot about the foster care system and getting them to sort of become foster parents. And, this friendship developed, and so the Chief Justice allowed me to do that adoption. And, it's had just a stunning impact on their lives. I mean, I will say that, the law enforcement people have just been amazing to them, both the FBI and the U.S. Marshals. They haven't told Jameson she was murdered, but, the children, their other two boys, were obviously frightened when, they knew that she had disappeared. I remember one time I think it was Zeke, who might have said to a teacher, well, will I disappear? I mean, it just has a huge impact on the family that they've had to navigate. And at one time, the Marshals, came down to their home. They were in Washington, D.C. at the time, and they brought badges for the kids. And they told them, you're safe, and we're going to make sure you're safe. There were a lot of people, the Manchester Police Department, amazing. The state police there, I think the FBI and the Marshals, they've all been wonderful to the family. I know, they have such a great respect for law enforcement because they weren't getting any answers or any help from Massachusetts. And that's the really sad part. But it's been a struggle, as Jonathan said, or as Blair said at the sentencing, you brought murder into our lives. And that's a really tough thing to deal with.
I'm glad you mentioned, gosh, I've got like 4 points just in what you said there, but I'm glad you mentioned about law enforcement, because law enforcement in Massachusetts, it's getting beat up, and I really want to have you back on. I'm probably going to also hopefully have Wendy on as well, to give and then probably one other Massachusetts attorney to talk about the Karen Reed case. But I don't want to digress, but because we know that geez, if I would have put that on my Twitter, the whole thing would be lighting up. But in any event, it's been hard for me to watch the black eye that law enforcement across the board, whether it, especially state and local in Massachusetts, it's getting because of several horrible eggs that deserve to have reprimands and or be in prison like where they're at. And I think other apples will fall either through their incompetence or through criminal actions, perhaps. But it's so nice to hear, because I can tell you that law enforcement, 90 whatever percent, a huge percentage, they miss time with their own families, seeing their children's ball games, doing what they want to do, missing anniversaries, being with their spouses, because they're so devoted toward a case. And they become emotionally invested. They try to do everything they can for victims, and people don't see that. And it's really a shame. It's like in anything, everybody watches the shiny ball that's negative, and everybody forgets about the majority.
Yeah, very, very true. I mean, I come from a family full of law enforcement people, federal agents, police officers, and I know what that commitment is and have seen it. And I think, it was probably one of the few positives for Blair and Jonathan to have all of these people, whether they were FBI or whether they were marshals, just there to talk to their kids. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to, go to their home, and they didn't have to sit down and explain, you're safe, you're not going to disappear. I mean, it was, it would be hard to explain how meaningful it was to them, but, we've talked about it a lot, and just about their respect and for law enforcement. And when they did a press conference after the sentencing, they were very clear to say that. And I wrote about that in the book. I said, they didn't hear word one from Massachusetts. No one will contact them. No one will tell them why there was no sibling visitation, which is supposed to be part of these cases. But in New Hampshire, the Attorney General, the marshals, the police all treated Jameson and the family as victims, which they have a right to be recognized as, and gave them a voice. And that's really the only voice that they had. So you're right. I think people do not ever want to see that, that side of it, and as someone who has a lot of law enforcement people in the family, it's a constant worry, when knowing that, they're out there and that they're willing to put their lives on the line for other people. People don't want to see that. And yes, some very, very negative things have happened with people doing the wrong things. The Massachusetts State Police are, of course, under fire. But I've seen a different side of them. When someone threatened to kill my kids, for example, when I took their kids away, someone threatened to. I was told to exterminate my kids. At one point, I had to get a lifetime restraining order. I had police officers sitting outside police car sitting outside my house on Thanksgiving one year, for threats. When you take people's children and put them in foster care, sometimes that garners a lot of negativity and threats. So, and what I've seen are the police officers in my town, coming by my house every 2 hours. What I've seen of the state police showing up at my house and doing investigations and filing charges if they thought it was necessary. I've seen that side of it, and it's one of the things I'm so grateful for, because it's difficult, when my kids were like 6 and 7, 6 and 9 and having to call the school and say, there's a threat against my children. If you're going to be out on the playground, please have someone there. It's pretty disturbing, when you have to deal with it. And so there's a side to law enforcement, that I think a lot of people don't want to see. And I can see why it's clouded by cases like the Reed case, where law enforcement officials, didn't do the right thing.
Well, we'll get into that on another time, Judge, yep. Because of course I may have a little bit of a different slant on some of that. But I wanted to tell people just a little anecdote here is FBI, which is really cool, actually pays money to buy little FBI badges. They're plastic and they're something that for me, I carried my entire career. Why? Because at least back then, a lot of people really admired the FBI. And whenever there was a child, whatever, I could have found out through a friend or via somebody that I, had to go interview just as a witness. And they
right.
said, oh my gosh, my child loves the FBI. I mean, I would break out my little badges and hand them out. And I mean, I've handed out hundreds of those badges throughout my career. But that's just a little piece. I know that that's minor compared to what you're talking about, but what you're speaking to is what the FBI does that a lot of people don't realize is go to your house. And when you do have a situation where children are afraid, they wonder, is there another Adam Montgomery around the corner to do what he did to Montgomery to them? For an FBI agent to come in dressed in a suit, not in khakis and a t-shirt like you see them on TV all so often now, unfortunately, and talk to these children, it's really, really moving for them. I think helps assure them.
Yeah, it is just amazing to watch. And, I think most police officers are very supportive of that. Lots of times, when I was on the bench, I would have want to send things to kids. I would see them, and lots of times we would give them books and other things. But there were times when I just couldn't get out there in the town, and I would want to get like a book or something to a child. And the police officers in the town were like, "Hey, give it to us. We'll get there." We would send things to kids. I mean, it's people I don't think realize just how serious it is. They think, oh, the juvenile court's the juvenile court. But I mean, I had at least 4 cases where there were murder-suicides leaving children behind. And so, of course, they came into state custody. And I had cases, in one very public case of a father which was made public, who was visiting his son in the summer, had never really had him before. He came here from another state and was punching him in the head, and it was a brain death case. And we had to decide whether we were going to remove him from the life support or not. And so, this serious stuff, and you can see it on the faces of the police officers who have to investigate that stuff. And, they're finding this, this little boy who's comatose in that particular case, or I can't even imagine what it's like, with them walking into a murder-suicide. But I remember in some of the murder-suicides, the social worker coming in with a affidavit to get custody of the children and crying, because it's so emotional. So, you're right. I mean, I think just doing things like that, like having little buttons and giving them to kids, it's not, you could say, oh, it might be small. It's not a small thing to these kids. It means everything to them to have things like that. When we did the book launch, I got these purple pens because Harmony's favorite color was purple, and we wrote Remembering Harmony. And one of the dads was here and spoke at the launch. And then I sent some pens back to the boys, and Jonathan called me the other day and said, Jameson, someone sent him some replica eyeglasses of Harmony, which he puts on his nightstand, and it just has a lot of meaning to him. This is a child who, when she disappeared, who would run after kids in the park if they had blonde hair and say, are you my sister Harmony? So they were dealing with this. And so Jonathan brought these pens back, and he called me and he said, he took that pen, and we had little purple lapel pins ribbons, and he put it right on that nightstand. He laid it there. It means a lot to him. And we had some extra pens, and they, contacted me yesterday that his teacher had sent a picture that he had given one to his teacher because, it just meant a lot to him. So these kind of things, these small things, they just mean the world, to kids in those situations. So good for you doing that, because I'm telling you, I've seen the kind of response it gets from children when you do that. And, for Jameson, who deals with so much, oftentimes, he will say, he'll say to Jonathan, well, you met Harmony. Remember, she was in my closet that night. She gave us candy. He'll say things like that. She's always on his mind. And so small things like that make a huge difference in the lives of kids.
Let me ask you this. How is Jameson doing?
He is doing amazingly well. He doesn't know she was murdered. He may have some indication that someone hurt her because he'll say, why would someone hurt her? But he's very confused about that, but he's not ready for that. Mm-hmm. So when they did tell him, once they knew that she had died and it was everywhere and it would be at school, and, he was 5, they knew they had to tell them. I write about it. Well, they actually, I say, okay, I have them, the 4 chapters in the book of them talking back and forth, and Mai's just sort of transcribing it with questions that I had asked. And they had a very difficult time with this. And so finally Blair said something like, Harmony's in heaven. And Jameson said, what do you mean? Did she die? And Jonathan said, yes. To this day, I have a hard time reading it, even though I had to write it all out because it's really compelling. And Jonathan is talking, and this is in the book, and Jonathan says, and I never saw a 5-year-old just collapse like that. Oh. Collapsed into your arms, he says to Blair, sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and saying, I wish she wouldn't have died. So, they've had to navigate this, and he's doing very well. He's incredibly smart, very, very intelligent, and just a sparkle like couldn't believe. And the 3 boys, have a wonderful life with these dads. I mean, they, engage in all kinds of activities. The dad's very involved in their education, but they sort of make it fun. They do all kinds of fun things. Like once a month, if they're going to study Greece, they'll all dress up in like outfits from Greece, and they'll have Greek foods, and each kid does some kind of thing. I mean, they're an amazing family, but he's very smart. He's doing very well. But there's always this, there's always these questions that pop up. I was FaceTiming with them. We were talking about a completely different subject. And sometimes he'll call me Judge Carol, and sometimes he'll call me Miss Carol, whatever else. And he says, Miss Carol, did you do Harmony's adoption too? And so he doesn't, doesn't have a sense, that it was, it was her father, because I think that is going to be just devastating. So instead, they incorporate Harmony into their lives. What do you think? What color do you think Harmony would like? Or every time he draws a picture, I have pictures in the book. Every time he draws a picture of the family, he draws a picture of Blair and Jonathan and their 2 dogs, and Zeke and Cash and him. And then above them, he puts a heart in the sky and puts an H in the middle of it every single time. So she's always on his mind. And but he's smart and has a wonderful life. As I have said in the past, he's safe and he's loved. And so he's doing very well, but they have a lot to navigate because he just doesn't, he's only just 7. So he doesn't really know a lot. So we don't know. I think, this is a worry for Blair and Jonathan, like, how are they going to tell him? And how is this? They've said this publicly. How is this going to happen what's going to happen when he's 15, when he's 18, when he's 20? How is he going to find any peace knowing how she died? I think that's the hardest thing.
Yeah, they're going to have to get a really good grief counselor for him probably to explain, because, I'm sure he's probably going to deal at that point later in life with survivor's guilt. Look at my wonderful life. I'm dressing up like a Greek person or an Italian person. I've got great parents taking care of me. I'm loved. And look at Harmony, which was just the antithesis of that, really. So hopefully they'll find a good counselor for him. Have another question, and this goes to where we're at, because at the end of the day, Judge, this needs to not ever happen again, where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, where a father like this could ever get custody of a child. What is happening to further advance legislation, Harmony's Law, something to help make this not happen again? Help us.
Thanks. It's a great question. We've tried. I think when we did the launch, we had some New Hampshire state reps that actually came down here to Massachusetts, and they're making some changes in the law. New Hampshire has since said that they will now agree to do home studies. They have a memorandum of understanding with Massachusetts, but that doesn't change the fact that lawyers are going to argue it's unconstitutional and that there won't be those arguments and appeals. So we're looking for changes in federal law. We've been in conversations with Congressman McGovern, who's from this area, and Senator Moore, who is a state senator, filed legislation to create a Harmony Commission to examine these laws and to find out what needs to be changed, which is a lot. But I will tell you that they killed the bill the first time. And then a year ago, we testified before, Blair and Jonathan and I testified before the House and Senate committee about creating this commission. And interestingly, they waited months to report it out favorably just before the budget, and then they killed it. So it's hard not to be cynical in the book, and I'm very cynical about it because, the Massachusetts House just continues to just ignore. They want to ignore it. They don't want the secrets out of this case, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book, because it just looks so bad, with them failing to provide services, failing under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so in the book, hard not to be cynical and angry. And I say, just as Adam Montgomery said, he bashed Harmony around the House. I said she didn't fare much better in the Massachusetts House, which I'm sure is going to ruffle some feathers with the legislators. But, we've come to this conclusion where, it's been 2.5 years. They've done nothing. They've made no changes. And if they've made changes, they haven't said what those changes are. It's all a big secret. So it's pretty hard at times in the book not to be cynical and angry, just because we've decided we're just not going to let people forget about her, until, we need to make changes in the law. And if that doesn't happen, as I have said repeatedly, there will be further child fatalities in Massachusetts.
Absolutely. And for anybody on here right now that's listening in our audience, and you are from Massachusetts or New Hampshire, I really, really want to encourage you to use your platforms, to use your voice, and to use your vote. When you see the people that are killing legislation like this to help things like forcing home visitations before individuals get custody or while they have custody, when you're seeing legislation not being moved toward this commission to help look at all the deficits that happen in Harmony Montgomery's case, use your vote and vote against those people. Get new people in office that will change things, because that's all we can do. That's really all we can do, is be a loud and proud voice for Harmony Montgomery so that her legacy will mean something.
Yes, thank you very much for saying that. We do think that we want her legacy to mean something more than the child who was beaten to death in the back seat of a car. And, we're hoping to get those voices. And Blair, of course, has a big platform. I mean, he's an anchor and reporter, of course, in Atlanta now. And, it's good that he's been able to, with the support of his supervisors, use his platform. They're dedicated to helping other people. Jonathan's an emergency department nurse. And so we're trying to use those platforms. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I appreciate the fact that, you've been on Harmony's case from the beginning, along with, just being one of the people that's out there talking about these kids that no one can find, that, may not have survived, that have disappeared like Harmony. I mean, I think that's something I see you do frequently on your platform. I mean, people can get all upset about, these cases in Massachusetts, and, people want to, just tweet about them. But I think, one of the most important aspects of your platform, especially given your background in law enforcement, is that you're telling people, look, this isn't a good situation. Where is Sebastian? Where is this child? Where is that child? What's happened? Keeping those kids in the forefront. Because I think if you don't do that, and we don't have other people doing it, people are just going to forget these children. And, for my life, I just can't, see that happening. Someone has to speak for them. And this is about giving Harmony a voice, but using her voice to hopefully protect other children.
Yeah, Judge, we have a lot in common in this regard, because you've had your career. I reeled off kind of all the things you've done. And I think we're in a lot of the same space, in that now it's time for us to try to do something that is really meaningful on a basis that really helps other with our outreach. For you, you're a writer. You could write this book to bring Harmony to life and to help launch a legacy for her, and hopefully get everyone in our audience, and we're going to talk about how to get a hold of your book, to buy this book, to read this book, to vote, to have a voice. And for me, for sure, my biggest voice, what I care about the most, are these missing children and domestic violence and abuse. Yes, I like to bring light about criminal cases that I think are, people, it's going astray, but that's my passion.
Yes, and I can tell it's your passion. And, and there aren't a lot of people that are just posting every day, this child is missing. For Harmony's story, yes, the book is out there, but we're donating all profit from the book to the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, because it's never been about, making money or having people. I think someone on Facebook said, is there anyone who isn't cashing in on Harmony? And I usually don't respond to that, but I said the only people cashing in on the book about Harmony are the children in foster care that the Dave Thomas Foundation is trying to get out of foster care. So, that was a decision that, we made early on, and Blair and Jonathan, of course, were totally supportive of it. But yeah, you're right. There has to be a platform, for people. And, and other cases are worth talking about. You've done that, and I've done that on Court TV, for example, with the Birchmore case, when we're talking about, sexual exploitation and grooming and domestic violence. That was part of my everyday life in the juvenile court. So I greatly appreciate all you've done, on cases like that, but especially for these children.
And you, thank you so much. So again, this is a book going to profit a wonderful nonprofit helping adopted kids. You probably know, Judge, but I was adopted as an infant. And so that's something near and dear to my heart. It's amazing on Twitter. I don't know if you caught it, but I am a huge believer in safe haven boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe the amount of hate that
Unbelievable.
came on my platform when I said, listen, we need safe haven boxes in every city. These aren't like a trash dumpster. It's absolutely meant to save the child. They're at fire stations. So nobody has to worry about getting arrested or anything like that. It's nothing like that. Nobody's trying to make a case. They're trying to save a child who would end up in a dumpster, because
Right.
that happens all the time in this country.
Yes.
And
It's unbelievable. We have had a safe haven law in Massachusetts for 20 years. They don't do the boxes, but it's very clear. Everybody, there are signs, that you can leave the baby here. I had safe haven baby cases, where the mom brought the child to the hospital and dropped the child off in the emergency room. Most of the time, that's what would happen. I had 2 or 3 cases where these children ended up in wonderful adoptive homes. And that was the choice that the person made. But what's the option? To leave the child in the trash or in the dumpster? That has happened also. So, yeah, I couldn't believe that response. And, I'm an adoptive parent. So, I'm a step parent, I'm an adoptive parent. I understand, just the fact that people don't understand exactly how it all works. And so there's not much you can do about that. But I know, because I've actually done safe haven. I wanted to write that. How many of you people have done safe haven cases? I have. And I've seen the outcome, and the outcome's been wonderful.
Yeah, it can be beautiful. Well, I'm going to keep pushing that. Every time I read another story about a child in a dumpster, you're going to see it followed up by the safe haven push, because that should just never happen. A mom who is scared, who is struggling, who maybe her parents have no idea she's pregnant, should have a safe place to drop off that child, because it's got to be so hard on them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. It's really saves lives.
Tell us how to find your book. Tell us how to get a hold of this book, because I'm ordering the minute I get off.
Well, I have one here. This is what it looks like, and it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble right now. And like I said, and it's doing very well. I think when we launched it, there's been a lot of a lot of publicity about it. But I think probably for me, telling her story has been such an important thing for me, as well as Blair and Jonathan. And just the fact that any of these funds will go help the Wendy's Kids section of the Dave Thomas Foundation, is something that's really important to me.
That is awesome. Listen, I want to thank you so much, Judge Carol, for all your time today, for all of your knowledge, your information. Everyone, you can find Judge Carol on Twitter. You can find her also on the bookshelves. So please, everyone in the audience, please reach out, get that book. It'll make a contribution. You'll learn so much. I've learned so much today myself. All these intricate details you shared with us. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to have you on again. I hope you will bless us with your presence here, because I do want to get into I hate to call it the Carol Reed case. It is the John O'Keefe case. He was the victim in this.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that. I want to do yourself and then 2 other attorneys, probably, 2 other attorneys with opposing thoughts on the case. And I want to dig deep into it really from a lot of different standpoints. And hopefully we'll keep the drama out, but discuss passionately and factually that case a bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. As you know, I never say on Twitter anything about guilt or innocence. I was a judge for too long. It's the jury's decision. So, but I do like to educate people about the law and what I see and what I think, people are thinking about the case. But I'm literally horrified at the vitriol and the harassment and intimidation that's going on of people, especially a family that's lost a son or a brother. It's so disturbing to me and so worrisome. And, I hope it stops. It's like, this is a legal proceeding. I don't know, I understand people are so into this case, but, the bottom line is it's really going to rest with 12 people. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. And we're seeing, I think, I just read 10 individuals have been charged. I posted about one of the most prolific individuals because he was the main person going after Colin Albert as being he was 17 at the time, a minor who was behind the murder of John O'Keefe. And I'm just so glad to see law enforcement step in, as you know, and we'll talk about it more. But there's a huge line. This isn't gray. There's a line between harassing a victim and witness intimidation and a First Amendment right. There's a big black line. To me, it's not gray at all. And I look forward to those discussions too. I want to do that discussion after the adjudication of the blogger Aidan Carney, his case, because once that case is done, I think we're going to get a lot more. I think a lot more people will see the line, although I know it will be used as some sort of martyr case. But
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to, to even get into a discussion about these things because it's so fluid and there are just so many things happening. But it's, as a judge, sitting in a courtroom and knowing, that there's a process and what that process is, it's very hard to see this sort of thing break down, with people from the public so actively getting involved in a case that's not going to be decided by the public. I mean, the bottom line is the case is going to be decided by a jury. There's a process. You need to follow the process. That's, what I have been saying as a judge. My heart breaks, I think, for the O'Keefe family. They've lost a son and a brother and a friend. And, that's just heartbreaking. And, as far as Karen Reed goes, she's the only person that has any rights in that trial because obviously there's only one person that has a constitutional right in a trial to a fair trial. And so, my hope is that, whatever trial comes up next will be a fair trial because that's what she's entitled to. But I'm it's hard not to be sympathetic, for this mom. John O'Keefe's mom. I mean, she's lost a son. There's a victim here, and I wish people would remember that. I always on the bench, whether it was a rape case or something where the victim was going to speak, I always just try to be, very, empathetic and really listen to people about how these things have impacted their lives. And so a lot of lives impacted. I'm sure we'll have more discussions about this. As you know, I've sort of kept myself, to sort of the legal aspect of the case and just explaining it without, jumping into this because I don't see the point. People are, I don't see the point to jumping into, this kind of atmosphere, not after so many years of just believing in the process and how the process should work. I just don't want to speak out, about all this stuff that's going on around it in the periphery. But we'll see. We'll see. I agree with you. There are, I think, a lot of people who think that the First Amendment allows them to say anything. And that's just, of course, not what First Amendment law is. The First Amendment's not absolute. That's why we have defamation laws. That's why there's slander. That's why there's libel. That's why there's criminal harassment. That's why there's intimidation. All of those things have been upheld for decades. All those kinds of actions. So some speech is actionable, and I guess we'll have to see what happens. I'm more interested in I've read the appellate brief, that just got filed. So
yes.
I was an appellate attorney, that was part of my practice. And so I can't help but, be interested in that part of the case. And I sort of push the other stuff aside and really concentrate on what's being filed with the appeals court and now the SJC and reading those briefs and just sort of analyzing them and thinking to myself, just how do I think the SJC will see this? From my perspective, that's, that's where I am, because that's, I think, more who I am.
Well, Judge, that's why I love your view, because your view comes from the bench. And I think as a law enforcement officer, I love to dig into the facts. And as a victim advocate, at least in the John O'Keefe case, not only do I feel like, or believe, not believe, no, because I've seen the evidence that John O'Keefe's family has been severely harassed. Seen it, watched it. Although some videos are contrived, the videos I've seen are real. And then also to see that happening to the witnesses in this case, the Albert family, the McCabe family, Allie McCabe, who was just a young girl when all this happened. When I say a young girl, a girl in high school, a younger girl. It's hard to watch. I say high school. I think she was 19, so I guess that could be, college, but young. And that's hard for me to watch. And I know for me, that is what really grabbed my attention on this case initially. And as far as the appellate piece, I just think it is so cut and dried. It's cut and dried. There was no verdict. But I really want to get your point of view. Shoot, we might have to come back and do this.
Yeah, I'll definitely come back. I mean, the appellate brief is brilliantly written. It's very persuasive, and it raises, I think, three major issues. Of course, the double jeopardy claim, the manifest necessity claim, and within the context of that, whether there were errors by Judge Cannoni when she declared the mistrial. There's a tendency, I think, for the justices on many types of cases to not get into the issue of form over substance, and whether, things like whether there was a verdict slip or not. To me, I think, I don't know, but I think that might be a more minor issue. But I think it's very persuasively written. And of course, they say, if you're not going to, just dismiss these two charges, which I doubt, of course, alternatively, they're asking the court to, have the judge interview the jurors. I mean, who knows how that would turn out at this point. It's a very persuasively written brief by a brilliant appellate attorney. I mean, people say, oh, she has a new attorney. Well, of course, she has an appellate attorney, because trial attorneys often don't, write appeals, as you know. They bring in an appellate attorney who's a skilled appellate attorney. That's exactly what they did. I read the brief the other day. It's extremely well written, but Judge Cannoni's decision was also extremely persuasive and well written. So I'm assuming that the Commonwealth will have, an equally persuasive brief, but, they have their appellate unit writing it. And, it's, usually those people are very good at what they do, because that's what they do. They write appeals. But it was just a fascinating brief to read. And, we can talk more about it at some point, once the prosecutor, once the Commonwealth files its brief. But it's very interesting, just very interesting to me. That's where my head is at. I try to stay away from all the circus atmosphere surrounding this case, and I feel a lot safer in that realm.
Well, you're right. You are a lot safer. I never thought I would be, as an agent, particularly when I worked the gangs, just like you, had so many threats. I think at one point, 6 threats. They were in open court.
Wow.
I'm going to kill you, just threatening, because of course you're seen as the face of the case, meaning in your case, you're seen as the judge who made the final decision. And as an agent, you're the one, as the case agent, testifying from A to Z, everything about the case as the summary witness. So you're seen as the one that is behind them being put behind bars, when we all know it's a system.
Yeah.
Right? You're just doing your job. Meaning the agent is just doing their job, compiling facts. The prosecutor is doing their job, seeing if the law comports with the facts you've put together to charge. And then you, as a judge, you're making decisions also based on the law and the facts. So it's everything. But it's interesting that defendants want to find somebody They
Right.
want to find
You know,
somebody they can hold accountable.
yes, someone to blame. And of course, when you're a judge and you make that decision, or whether you're an agent or a police officer and you're testifying, it just puts you in harm's way. Yeah, I found some of the comments that I've seen, about you to be really concerning, really threatening, or at least I view them. There maybe there's some vagary, but I've had enough threats over the years to be worried about that. And I thought that some of the things that are said about you because you take a particular position are really concerning. And I have to ask myself, why are people so just so in such an exaggerated state about this, that they're threatening people? I think, as you saw in 2020, this one friend of the O'Keefe said, someone came up to her window and called her a murderer. I mean, she's a friend of like a lot of it just didn't make sense to me. So that's why I've sort of just said, I'm not going to tweet about this, but I am going to tweet about, what I see, inside the courtroom and how I think it might affect a jury. And I'm going to use my experience and not, jump into the fray and start this ongoing conversation with people. Because as you find out, when you respond to some of these folks, you're not going to change their view. I just don't know why it devolves into this name calling. And I think one of the things you posted was really concerning to me, because it just seemed like it was a threat. And that's worrisome to me, as I'm sure you can keep yourself safe. You were a former FBI agent. For me, as a judge, this was not something I was expecting when I got on the bench.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I expected this in my FBI life, and to see it now, I mean, I've had so many threats, and one so specific, from Aiden Carney, Turtle Boy. Had to trace back the IP. I mean, had to contact the FBI, and others that, don't even know me, that I've had to talk to, reach out to our police department where I live, people threatening to come to my house. I've had to put my family on notice. And of course, my husband is livid about this whole situation. Why? Because I have a difference of opinion, and I believe it's wrong for anyone to point blame toward people who I don't believe had anything to do with the crime. I understand a rigorous defense. I understand a third-party culprit sometimes needs to be sort of a part of that defense, but what should never happen is a mob going after these witnesses, harassing, intimidating, going to their homes. It's unbelievable. I haven't even posted some of the things I really need to. As we get closer to trial, I probably will.
Right.
It's unbelievable. As you said, the vitriol, hate that people have for people they don't even know because of an opinion.
Right. I don't want to say it doesn't make any sense to me, because it does, because I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it, with cases that I've had, with people becoming angry, holding signs outside the courthouse, they kidnapped my child, things like that. I can understand why they feel that way. But this is at a level that's just very, very disturbing to me. And, I think for you to be in that situation, it's just appalling. I mean, it is literally appalling. And, like you say, you have to alert your family. I've been in that situation before, and I remember, at some point saying, okay, well, I need to get my license to carry, even though I hate guns. I'm afraid of guns, and at some point I got my license to carry, and then I wouldn't get a gun because I thought, well, I don't think I'd use it if I had to. And then I got a firearm, and I think I locked it away. and put the ammunition somewhere else, with, my family members who are in law enforcement said, that, what are you going to do? You're going to say, wait a minute, so, there are people, lots of people like me, who, if in a situation, just, even though I took lessons and, and knew how to use it, there are people like me who are never going to be comfortable, having a firearm, so I just had to make that decision saying, I'm never going to be comfortable. I probably won't renew this license to carry. And so, you rely on law enforcement. I was lucky to have that, and it's good that you have that training, but you also have a family. And that's, a worrisome thing. And I have been just absolutely disgusted by some of the things that have been written. I'm sorry that you're getting threats. And a lot of times I just, want to send you a message saying, I hope you're safe, because this is really concerning.
Thanks. Well, I hope as people start getting charged, I keep a close eye on that, that people will start being dissuaded. I think that some people, Judge, think this is some sort of a game. I mean, it's almost like they have inserted themselves into as the world turns. I mean, that's how ridiculous this case has gotten, where it's a circus and it's people are eating popcorn and cotton candy. I mean, going out there, kids are out there, they're out of school. They take their kids out of school to be part of this. They face paint, they dress up like turtles. It's hard to believe this is a murder trial and John O'Keefe is dead.
Yeah.
And it's like some of these people insert themselves and then they assume a role. And that role in many cases is the villain, the part of the mob that's going to lynch up anybody who goes against the accused. And we're seeing it play out. Like, I don't think I've ever seen it play out except maybe in OJ. I think OJ had this sort of fire in the individuals watching that trial.
I think you're right. I remember the OJ case and, everybody's stopping what they were doing the moment that the verdict was read. That's the way it was. And that's the way it's been on the Reed case. But I think, again, I say to myself, I'm not going to jump into this. I'm not going to make comments. I'm only, going to say that it has devolved into something that's really alarming. But not only that, it's not going to have any influence on what ultimately happens, because what ultimately happens boils down to 12 people. And so I'm, I think if people want to be supportive of Karen Reed, that's one thing. You can say, hey, we're supportive of you. We think you're innocent and, we think you should be acquitted. That's different than the way things are with this case now. And so, my hope is that, this will calm down. You're telling me that there have been some charges filed. I haven't seen that. So, maybe that'll change everything. I just don't know, but I do think you should be safe, and I certainly hope you will be.
Oh, thank you, Judge. Again, to focus back in as we close down, because I really appreciate all your time. Please buy Harmony's book. Everyone in the audience, in the chat, and Judge, thank you for writing it, and thank you for your contribution to a charity organization that's trying to help get people out of foster homes and into adoptive homes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you again soon.
Yep, take care. Stay safe, please.
You too. Everyone, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, the judge was great. I hope all of you follow her. She's a voice of reason. As you heard her say, listen, she's not one to get into the muck. I used to say, whenever I talked about the John O'Keefe case, I felt dirty, like I needed to take a shower afterwards, because the whole case is just so disgusting with what's going on around it. But she does a great job of staying clear of all of that and talking about law and talking about this appeal as an example and what we're talking about. And I know everybody's here to hear about Harmony, but I just wanted to mention the appeal that she's talking about is regarding the verdict. Well, I should say the hung jury. It was ruled a hung jury, and Judge Cannoni upheld that, and now they are basically fighting, and they have a hired, meaning Karen Reed, expensive and good appellate attorney to write up the appeal, saying no, 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 no. The counts 1 and count 3, those were actually really decided, and Judge Cannoni made errors, and here's some case law. And we haven't seen the CW's response. I've read a lot of that case law that supports that once this verdict is decided to be hung, so really a non-verdict, a hung jury, that it can't really, that there's nothing that can be done, at least case law wise. But remember, case law can change. Look at Roe v. Wade. So it'll be interesting to see, but that's what Judge Carol brings to Twitter, brings to YouTube, brings to Court TV and other venues where she gives an opinion, because it's based on law. It's based on her years of being a judge. And that is something I truly appreciate. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Let's see. Thank you, SD. That's so sweet. SD, that was very nice of you to make a contribution. And Forensic Intent, thank you so very much as well. To all my mods, because I always forget to say it every time, you are the best in the business. I keep a very, very small, tight mod group. People I really trust and I've gotten to know outside of YouTube, outside Twitter, and have had communications with either written or spoken. I thank you all for keeping the channel safe and for keeping it decent. So again, thank you to the judge. Until next time, may justice be served.